This is Protect My Town, a public affairs program featuring mayors from DuPage County and surrounding suburbs, talking about issues important to everyone who lives and works here.
I'm Village President Al Bulthuis. Villa Park is a member of the DuPage Mayors and Managers Conference. The conference has produced a program titled Protect My Town. This program highlights issues that will affect residents of our community. The following program will address the Local Government Distributive Fund, referred to as LGDF. When you pay your state income tax, a portion of your tax money is deposited into the LGDF for distribution to local governments. Villa Park receives approximately $2.2 million from this fund every year. The state of Illinois wants to take 10% of our and all other communities' portions of this fund to pay the state bills. The $2.2 million Villa Park receives from the LGDF is 10% of our $22 million general fund revenue. A 10% reduction from our LGDF receipts would lower our LDGF receipts by $220,000 and have a large impact on our village. The following program will explain in more detail the effect this reduction in LGDF will have on communities in Illinois and on Villa Park. It will also explain what you can do to protect Villa Park's share of our money. Enjoy the program.
Hello and welcome to Protect My Town. We'll be introducing you to our panel of mayors in just a moment. I'm Don Weiss, your host. Today we're talking about the Local Government Distributive Fund. And despite the cumbersome name, it's something every taxpayer should care about. The state's budget deficit is threatening the $1.2 billion fund that cities and towns rely on for basic services. For nearly 50 years, Illinois' Local Government Distributive Fund, also called LGDF, has played a vital role for local municipalities. It pays for essential services, things like police and fire, streets and sewers, and snow plowing. Here's how it works. The state collects income taxes from Illinois workers. Through a formula based on population, a certain percentage of the revenue gets dispersed back to every city and town. Ultimately, those dollars play a crucial role in municipal operating budgets. But with another state budget shortfall looming, Springfield is looking to take more than $120 million in LGDF funds. And mayors are urging Springfield to resist any attempts to take the money. Municipalities, which have to balance their budgets every year, have made tough choices in recent years, reducing personnel, cutting services, and controlling spending. This comes amid rising municipal costs, particularly public safety pensions, and calls for a property tax freeze which will limit revenue. While they support fixing the state's financial woes, mayors say that Springfield's power play doesn't fix the state's problems, but merely shifts the responsibility, ultimately, onto local taxpayers. Now, you, the viewer, have the ability to let lawmakers know how you feel about this important issue, and we'll let you know how to do that during our show. But let me introduce you now to our distinguished panel of mayors. We have Mayor Martin Tully from Downers Grove. We have Mayor Kevin Burns from Geneva, and Mayor Glenn Ryback from Wadsworth. Gentlemen, thank you very much for coming in and talking about this important issue today. Mayor Tully, let's start with you. For your community, your municipality in Downers Grove, what does the LGDF mean to your budget? Essentially, how much money in revenue are we talking about that comes through the LGDF funding to the village of Downers Grove?
Sure, and thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about this very important issue to all our constituents. For us, our share of the Local Government Distributive Fund in Downers Grove is about $4.5 million currently, which represents about 10% of our general fund, which is the fund that we use to provide basic services to our community. This is the operating fund. It provides things that I call sirens and snowplows, the important things that people count on every single day. Mm-hmm. Police, fire, and public works.
Right. Mayor Burns, let's talk about Geneva now, LGDF. In terms of the overall makeup of your budget, how much are we talking about that comes through this LGDF revenue source to Geneva?
LGDF in Geneva represents approximately 20% of our general operating fund. Approximately $2 million a year we rely on from
That's
our
huge.
friends. It's huge. It's huge. And any portion of that being removed requires significant consideration, and I would argue significant pain to our residents as well.
And basic services, as Mayor Tully just mentioned?
Absolutely. It's invested in what makes our community special. And when you remove any portion of that money, then we risk the reputation of our community being hurt simply because of lack of services.
Mayor Ryback, let's talk about Wadsworth now up in the Lake County area, but LGDF is critical, I'm sure, to your municipality, your board, and your constituents. Let's talk about that.
Similar to Geneva, about 18.2% of our income, $361,000 is what we received in the last year. We use that to maintain our 33 miles of roadway, plowing, resurfacing, and so forth.
We've heard in all three of these cases, in all three of your communities, and I know that the example is similar elsewhere, these are basic services we're talking about. These are the things that I think your residents see. They like to see squad cars coming down the street patrolling. They want to have that snowplow coming in when it's necessary. And if it doesn't appear, that's when you gentlemen and your staff and your other elected officials, you get the phone calls at the City Hall, right?
That's correct.
We do.
That it's critical, right? Well, I want to make sure that our viewers know that you can go to protectmytown.us, where you can contact your lawmakers directly to let them know how you feel about Springfield's attempts to cut local funding to your communities. And as these mayors know, it's critical. What's also important, mayors, I think you'd all agree, is you have to balance your budget every year.
Yes.
You cannot do as perhaps the state of Illinois has done and not deal with it, save it for another time. So these 20%, 18%, all this money we heard about are real dollars and real services. So Mayor Tully, if you had to go to your village commissioners and say, we're going to have to sustain a 10% cut in the LGDF funds for those basic services, what would that mean to the Village of Downers Grove?
Sure. For the Village of Downers Grove, a 10% cut in our portion of LGDF would be about $450,000 less each year. And unlike prior situations where maybe the economy went south during the Great Recession and we had to account for a one-time hit until things got better, removing that from our budget every single year would be a huge impact. A $450,000 loss in revenue that we rely upon to provide basic services like police, fire, public works, code services, community development, and economic development for our community would be a big deal. And why? Because most municipalities are made up of people. Our operating budget is probably supports 77% personnel. So to take $450,000 out of our operating budget means a big reduction in personnel. Those are the people that provide those services that you mentioned that our residents count on and expect every single day.
You mentioned economic development. I think that's critical too. We're talking about, you said sirens and snowplows and such, but economic development, that's growth in your communities as well. Mayor Burns, talk about the impact to Geneva. A 10% cut would be huge to your budget because people would feel it immediately, and these services that are provided would impact your residents in your community.
That's true, and I would echo what Mayor Tully said as well. With respect to Geneva, a 10% cut is approximately $250,000. It doesn't sound like a heck of a lot until you dive into that budget and realize what needs to be eliminated. And the moment you discuss what services need to be either suspended or eliminated, whether it be economic development, historic preservation, roads, police, fire, then those discussions become very serious. And to Mayor Tully's point, it's a compounding problem. You know, my feeling is the era of collaboration with our friends in Springfield has gone from collaborative to now conscription of local municipalities' success in not just managing their money, but investing their money wisely. And so from an elected official's perspective, and I believe my citizens and my colleagues on the council would agree with this, we're frustrated with the state's inability to understand how well we're doing locally and how they can learn from us.
And those citizens are also the constituents
Absolutely.
of the elected representatives and senators who are going to have to cast
That's right.
very key, important votes on this very issue that we're talking about.
Precisely.
Mayor Ryback, I would imagine same issues dealing with that. What would a 10% cut mean to the Village of Wadsworth?
Our road program runs on a 15-year cycle, and it's about $800,000 a year to maintain that program. Losing those funds would stretch the program to a point where some of the pavement would deteriorate prematurely in advance of that 15-year cycle of repair.
And every citizen, every homeowner wants to know, when is our road going to be resurfaced?
That's right. The calls come.
They call.
Yes.
They love to hear when it's going to happen. A little bit of pain for that will go a long way once the road is resurfaced, because that's critical infrastructure. You don't want to drive down a road in a community that you know it could be better than that.
Exactly right. In fact, our residents supported a referendum to increase their sales tax by another penny in the last year or two, because that was important to them.
Exactly.
So,
And again, as we're talking now, remember that your citizens, the people who live in the greater suburban area here, rely on those dollars because they originated in your community.
Absolutely.
Those are
That's right.
income tax, typically income tax dollars that your citizens earned, worked, got a paycheck, sent that money to Springfield with the understanding from many years ago, decades ago, that that money was going to come back. And I think if we're not answering that, if Springfield isn't answering that end of the promise, that end of the equation, then there's something wrong there. There's an imbalance. Would you agree that that's something you have to address?
It's absolutely something you have to
issue?
address, because you go back in history and realize that there was a trade-off. The trade-off was that municipalities would receive a share of the state income tax in exchange for giving up their ability to have their own local income tax. So we gave up that right to collect that money directly from our residents and put it back into our own communities in reliance upon the state doing it and returning it to us. And now diverting that money away from where it was intended to go is a big problem. The people need to understand that.
And to that point, are residents understanding this? Do people know what LGDF is, or do they really key more on those basic services that LGDF is funding? So maybe there's a little bit of a gap in just the basic understanding of what we're talking about here and why this is so critical.
that's right. And it was part of the 1970 Illinois Constitutional Convention, which established what you're referring to, Mayor. Yeah.
That's right.
Mayor Burns, a lot of people calling, and when they don't see the snowplow coming quickly, I mean, you can't get that quickly enough, especially people have to get to jobs, right?
Of course, exactly.
When you have a bad snow like that.
And we welcome the phone calls, no question about it, because it provides me, and I'm certain my colleagues, an opportunity to explain to them in great detail. You know, whether it's called LGDF, whether it's called money from Springfield, doesn't matter to the average citizen. And I consider myself and my family as average citizens. What matters is, does the agreement we have with the state of Illinois for nearly a half a century jeopardize our operations moving forward? The short answer is yes, it does. So how do we convince our citizens to contact their state representatives to say that what you're attempting to do is unfair and it's going to impact us directly?
Well, let's talk about that call to action, Mayor.
Yes.
You just mentioned that. Mayor Tully, what would you like to make sure that your residents of Downers Grove, your general region there that you represent, and the counties beyond, make sure that they know what is the one thing that they need to know critical to the LGDF issue and really the crisis that you could potentially be facing?
In addition to understanding what LGDF is and why it needs to come back into the communities that it originates from, in addition to understanding what the impact would be on the level of services within the community if we took this kind of a hit going forward, I think that residents also need to understand that there's a fallacy to what I've heard repeated at some levels, that municipalities need to share the pain of fixing the state's budget. First of all, this will not fix the state's budget because the state has a spending problem, not a revenue problem. So taking our money isn't going to solve it. But more importantly, what they don't understand, and Mayor Burns mentioned this earlier, is that municipalities have already gone through a great deal of pain since the recession and have made significant cuts. Since the Great Recession, for example, the Village of Downers Grove has reduced headcount by 73 positions, or 20% of our headcount has gone down. We've eliminated programs, DARE programs, other programs already, community policing in our town, in order to make sure that our budget is balanced and we are living within our means. So to say that we need to share the pain, I would flip that around and make sure that residents understand that what really needs to happen is, as Mayor Burns mentioned, Springfield needs to learn from municipalities, and they need to figure this out on their own and not on the backs of municipalities.
Well, I want to thank our panel of mayors very much. From Downers Grove, Mayor Martin Tully, Kevin Burns from Geneva, and Glenn Ryback from Wadsworth. Gentlemen, thank you very much. It's a critical issue, and we hope that we've helped educate your residents and residents of our region as to the LGDF issue and the importance that it presents to our communities. And a reminder for our viewers to go to protectmytown.us. Let your voice be heard on this very important issue. My thanks to the DuPage Mayors and Managers Conference for its support of this program. Again, thank you very much, mayors, and thank you for joining us as well. We'll see you next time on Protect My Town. This is Protect My Town, a public affairs program featuring mayors from DuPage County and surrounding suburbs, talking about issues important to everyone who lives and works here. Hello and welcome to Protect My Town. We'll be introducing you to our panel of mayors in just a moment. I'm Don Weiss, your host. Today we're talking about the Local Government Distributive Fund. And despite the cumbersome name, it's something every taxpayer should care about. The state's budget deficit is threatening the $1.2 billion fund that cities and towns rely on for basic services. For nearly 50 years, Illinois' Local Government Distributive Fund, also called LGDF, has played a vital role for local municipalities. It pays for essential services, things like police and fire, streets and sewers, and snow plowing. Here's how it works. The state collects income taxes from Illinois workers. Through a formula based on population, a certain percentage of the revenue gets dispersed back to every city and town. Ultimately, those dollars play a crucial role in municipal operating budgets. But with another state budget shortfall looming, Springfield is looking to take more than $120 million in LGDF funds. And mayors are urging Springfield to resist any attempts to take the money. Municipalities, which have to balance their budgets every year, have made tough choices in recent years, reducing personnel, cutting services, and controlling spending. This comes amid rising municipal costs, particularly public safety pensions, and calls for a property tax freeze, which will limit revenue. While they support fixing the state's financial woes, mayors say that Springfield's power play doesn't fix the state's problems, but merely shifts the responsibility, ultimately, onto local taxpayers. Now, you, the viewer, will have the ability to let lawmakers know how you feel about this important issue, and we'll let you know how to do that during our show. But let's introduce you to our guests. Today joining us, we have Mayor Jeff Prine from Itasca. Mayor, welcome. And Mayor Frank Trilla from Willowbrook. Mayor, welcome. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being here today. Mayor Prine, let's start off with you. How does the LGDF fund that we talked about in that video piece, how does that impact your community, the community of Itasca? And basically, how much does the village of Itasca receive in that LGDF funding?
Itasca gets a little bit over $1 million from the LGDF, which represents approximately 10% of our general fund budget. And that general fund is used for all our general operations of the government.
General obviously takes in so many different things, and it's critical. That's crucial to receive that money on a timely basis.
Correct. This money is used to plow snow, to fix streets, to pick up garbage. Even last year we had a storm, and you could say we needed that money to help clean up after the storm.
Basic services we're talking about.
Absolutely.
Mayor Trill, let's talk about Willowbrook for a moment now. How does the LGDF revenue that Willowbrook will receive, how does that impact your local community? How much are you receiving on a regular basis?
Well, we receive just over $800,000, about $820,000. The 10% that we lose comes down to about $81,000. It's a full-time job that wanes in the balance, or just a little bit less service that we can provide. It definitely has a direct effect on us. We're a AAA bond rated village, and we keep balanced budgets. And in the last 5 or 6 years, we've already reduced our workforce.
You're working lean, in other words. You have a lean staff. I would say both of your communities, similar sized communities. We're not talking about a lot of personnel at the City Hall or in the various departments.
We've cut a number of positions since the Great Recession, reduced our revenues back in 2009, and that still hasn't recovered from that.
And again, as it was stressed, balanced budgets are critical to both of your communities. You have to make sure they're balanced, and yet you said you have a AAA bond rating here, and that's real dollars back to your community and your residents.
Absolutely, and for the state, who continues to pile on expenses on the mandate side of the ledger, for them to take away revenue that has been, up to this point, sacred, is really vital. It really hurts.
And we're both non-home rule communities, which we're already capped on our property tax increases to start out with.
So that's a limit. That's the limit as to
Absolutely.
how local funding can be spent, and takes away that local control that you as elected officials have to maintain within your communities.
Correct.
Correct.
Right. Well, I want to make sure that our viewers are aware that they can go to protectmytown.us, where you can contact your lawmakers directly to let them know how you feel about Springfield's attempts to cut local funding to our communities. Mayor Prine, let's talk a little bit more about this LGDF potential cut. What would a 10% reduction mean to the village of Itasca? You've talked about the basic services, you've talked about the amount that's received, the fact that you are a non-home rule community. So if this 10% cut were to take effect, what would that mean in real day-to-day services?
Well, it'd be a $100,000 hit to our general fund, 10% of our funding. It's hard to say specifically what exact action the village board would take, but in the past when we've had these decreases in revenue, we've had to, the easiest thing and the most expensive is personnel. And usually that's the place that we have to cut. You still have to maintain your streets and provide the other services, but certainly at some point services may have to also be reduced.
Well, you're a service organization. You
Absolutely.
provide services in both cases. In all of your neighboring communities, you provide services. You're not here to come up with grand programs necessarily. You need to make sure that basic services are being provided in your towns.
Correct.
Right. Mayor Trillo, let's talk about that. What would that 10% cut, it's real dollars back to Willowbrook there. What would that mean in your case?
Well, they are real dollars, and the big issue is that I don't know of a mayor in the state of Illinois that doesn't want to participate and help with the state's budget crisis. So for years we've ratcheted the belt a little tighter. Now we're at the point where we have to consider personnel and things of that nature. So like you said, we have to balance our budget every year. So this was supposed to be a temporary thing for 1 year. Now it's a second year. So no, we're looking at eliminating a full-time position, possibly coming in with 2 part-timers that would eliminate a pension and our future obligations. We don't have a choice. We have to react to the expense side of the budget.
Right. The dollars that come from your community through the LGDF process, that state income tax that we talked about earlier, down to Springfield, those dollars originated in your community. That's the income tax. That's the income tax money that's paid by your residents. And so essentially it would impact. So even one person in your organization is going to be an impact devastating, so back to your own residents. Because again, we're talking about services that are being provided.
Right. I mean, every time you have less personnel, there's a few less things that we can do. If it, from community policing down to, our reaction time to a snowfall might even be delayed a little bit. If you have one less plow driver, it may take us a little bit longer to get the streets cleared or salt the sidewalks or whatever.
Public
it comes
safety,
down to.
water services, and these are things that you don't worry about it when it's not impacting you, but when that heavy snow comes in or those water main breaks happen, that you need those dollars. And again, we're talking about an impact to your residents, the same constituents that legislators represent in Springfield.
Right, and the money did originate in our towns, and I don't know of a single mayor who doesn't think of this as their money for their town and their budget. We have to, at some point, we would have to look at public safety, but this becomes a public safety issue as it goes on and that revenue gets decreased. Everyone's town is getting older, which means more people will be retiring. And nobody wants to work for the same amount next year as they did this year. So it's an issue. It's vital, and it's a source of revenue that, quite frankly, I don't think Springfield can do any better with that money than we can. They certainly haven't proved that in the past.
Very good. Final thoughts.
And these are dollars that were promised to us 40 years ago when they had the Constitutional Convention.
Yes.
The state, and I think wisely so, chose to institute a state tax and share those dollars with the municipalities at the expense of not allowing municipalities to have their own income tax. So they are, as Mayor Trillo said, these are monies that were promised to the municipalities long ago. It's time for them to keep the promise.
Final thought. Mayor Prine, to your residents of Itasca and surrounding communities?
Well, we try to provide the best possible services, and as much as if the state starts taking away our monies, we're going to have no choices but to limit the services, either cut them or delay infrastructure repairs and such.
Very good. Mayor Trillo, a final thought to our residents.
Well, my final thought would be the LDGF funds are your funds. The money belongs to your community. So reach out to your state representatives, state senators, let them know that it's important for them to make the LGDF.
A little cumbersome, but it's real.
Make it whole.
Again.
You have to make it whole, and
Their
that's what we
dollars.
need. It's their money. It needs to be spent in their backyard.
That's right. And we have a very unique way and an important way and really a very easy way to do that, mayors. And I hope that we'll get this message to all of our residents that you can go to protectmytown.us to let your voices be heard on this important issue. Thanks to the DuPage Mayors and Managers Conference for its support of this program. And I want to thank our mayors for joining us today. And we will see you next time on Protect My Town.